This is part 69 of my series on my N-gauge model railway project. Previous parts covered the project from its inception through the creation of the baseboard, selection and laying of track, building of scenic items, obtaining rolling stock, etc. The project is ongoing. This part deals with a new loco, new to me and new to everyone as it was just released, the 2020 Graham Farish Stanier 8F. This loco was originally slated for release around the middle of 2020, but likely because of COVID and maybe other things, its release date kept getting moved back month by month until it finally came out towards the end of November. I pre-ordered this model from Rails of Sheffield, and I must give them a shout-out as they really do seem to provide the best selling arrangements for this kind of thing from my perspective as an overseas buyer in Canada. When I buy items directly from the Rails of Sheffield website, they always correctly exempt me from paying VAT since the item bought is being immediately exported, but not all UK sellers will do this, and they pack items very well, ship them promptly, and they manage to ship small packages to me, international signed Royal Mail, for £12 shipping and handling, whereas many UK vendors charge me £25 or more to ship to Canada. So the upshot of this was that I bought this loco for a total, including shipping and handling, of £132.37, which was less than Rails of Sheffield's UK retail price, of, including VAT, of £144.45. Bachmann's recommended retail price for this model is £169.95 for the basic non-DCC fitted version that I bought. Not cheap. I guess I should say a few words about the real 8F in case anyone watching is not familiar with the type. The 8F was one of the most successful products of William Stanier's time as Chief Mechanical Engineer of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. The type was introduced to service in 1935. It was based on Stanier's earlier Black 5 460 mixed traffic locomotive, but the 8F, originally rated 7F actually, with its 280 wheel configuration, was always intended specifically as a heavy freight engine. It was essentially a fairly simple design and classically Stanier, with a tapered boiler, bell-pair firebox, superheater, twin external cylinders, basically the same cylinders as the Black 5, and Walschaerts valve gear. A good number went into service with the LMS in the 1930s, and when war broke out in 1939, the type was designated the standard heavy engine by the War Department, with over 200 being ordered by the War Department before the WD Austerity type was introduced in 1943. And the WD Austerity type itself was closely based on the 8F, simplified somewhat and more tailored to the constraints of wartime production. 8Fs themselves continued to be produced for use on Britain's railways until 1946, with a total of over 800 produced in all, and many of the type continued in service with British Railways after nationalisation in 1948. The 8F was a common sight on Britain's railways, especially the LMS lines, for many years, and was one of the best, if not the best, British heavy freight steam engine ever produced. Several have survived into preservation. So, this is how my Farish model arrived after unpacking from its well-protected shipping box. There was never much question which version I wanted. I don't do DCC, so I didn't want the DCC sound-fitted version, although apparently all versions have an internal speaker fitted. And my prototype is operations in the 1930s as far as possible, so I didn't want the BR version. There's also an LNER version offered, which is fairly obscure, since as far as I know, the LNER only ran a couple of 8Fs briefly in the early 1940s on loan from the LMS. But 8Fs in LNER livery did exist, and you can buy a model of one from this model in that livery from Farish if you want to. Here's the model out of its box, but still in its protective shell. These shells seem to work very well, protecting the model and allowing you to get it out quite easily without risk of damaging it. And these models do require careful handling, as there's quite a bit of delicate, separately fitted external detail, as well as complex valve gear. Here I'm gradually unwrapping the shell. I thought the handrails looked a bit odd at the front there, But here's a picture of a real 8F for comparison, and the rails really do stick out beyond the supports at the front, although they do actually have a sort of a little knob on the end, which makes it look a little less odd. This model hits a fairly high standard for external detail in N-gauge, with quite a number of well-made separately fitted parts, window glazing, complex valve gear. Here's the owner's info sheet that comes with the model. As you may see, in addition to the fitted detail parts, there are a number of optional additional detail parts that can be fitted, although most of them require that you give up on the idea of having a front coupling. There's even a snowplow, but apparently you're expected to glue it on, although with PVA glue, so it would possibly be, you might be able to glue it on and then remove it without too much trouble. There are cab doors also, but only for display purposes, basically because model layout curves are much more extreme than real railway curves. Here's the other side of the owner's info sheet, giving details re running in, lubrication and DCC fitting. Nothing too unexpected here, but note at the bottom right that the model has traction tyres and replacements can be bought, although none are included. Here's the extra detail pack as it comes, tucked into the end of the shell. The large piece with the 2 pins is the snowplow. I haven't actually done anything with any of these yet. Here's a close-up of the bottom of the boiler and the valve gear, which is pretty impressive. Another view trying to show those details of the valve gear, etc. Excuse fingers. So now here is the loco down on the tracks, ready to be run in. Definitely quite an impressive model, and a big step up in terms of detailed appearance from the previous Farish 8F, which mainly had everything moulded on. There's also quite a bit of internal cab detail, although honestly it's difficult to see and difficult to photograph. This was about the best I could manage in the way of looking into the cab. I may go for detailing the front of the model and dispense with the front coupling, I'm not sure at this point. Notice that there's also quite a bit of rivet detail. You can see the cab maybe a little better here. I'm not too impressed with the coal load in the tender. I might do something about that at some point. So for now, this model needs to be run for an hour or so, half one way, half the other way to run it in. Here it is going over the viaduct, past the horse cart I just finished making from a kit after quite a bit of work. This is basically the same picture with flash. I dither about that constantly. I think the version without flash looks more natural. And after its proper running in, I hooked the loco up to a train. Despite having 12 wagons, this is actually a fairly light train, as all the loads are just dummies with no added metal weights. In most respects, this new 8F is typical of recent Graham Farish releases, extensively detailed and quite impressive looking, but almost entirely plastic and so very light. The loco and tender weigh in at just over 70 grams, that is just under 2.5 ounces, so definitely on the featherweight side for such a large loco. This lack of weight naturally tends to compromise pulling power, and of course the 8F, based on its prototype, should be an extremely powerful freight engine. In this case, Bachmann have compromised by fitting traction tyres. I believe this is the only Graham Farish model I have that's designed with traction tyres, though I have improvised with Bullfrog Snot liquid traction tyre product on several of my Farish models to make them pull better. Here's the bottom of the model in a servicing cradle. It's loco driven with pickups on loco and tender wheels and traction tyres on the back pair of driving wheels. That's not a traction tyre on the wheel one in from the back, it's just dirt. I assume this must have been picked up from the tracks during running in. I assume so. I assume it didn't come that way, though I didn't check the wheels closely before running it in. I cleaned the wheels at this point. I used my wheel cleaner to clean all of the wheels, although I left the pair with the traction tyres alone. Here's the bottom of the loco with the wheels after cleaning. After trying it with the lighter train, I tried this new 8F with my 20 wagon test train that I've been using previously to gauge loco pulling tower. With its traction tyres, the 8F was able to get the test train up the major curve gradient to the viaduct, albeit with some hesitation and wheel spin. The only other Farish loco I have that was able to get the test train up this gradient was the tender-driven version of the Black 5, and that struggled rather more than this 8F. On the other hand, all Union Mills locos without traction tyres, but with much more weight being made mainly of metal, can get the test train up the gradient with no problems. Now let's look at some running video of this model. I'm afraid it does seem to exhibit some problems, being more prone to getting stuck when you try to run it slowly than most engines, even after thorough running in. Since there are many pickups and they do seem to work, I'm thinking that this issue with getting stuck is likely a side effect of having to drive the extremely complex arrangement of valve gear and connecting rods. They do work, but getting steady, slow running without stalling is not easy, even after full running in, as you'll see somewhat in this running video. The motor in this model is coreless, and it's possible that this also contributes to the stalling problems when trying to run slowly. Okay, now for some running video of the 8F. Here we're running it in. It's just coming across the viaduct. It's running around initially forward light engine. Standard running in, half an hour forward, half an hour backwards, maybe a little over. It did in fact stall once during the running in. It ran half an hour forwards, fine, no problem. But at one point during the half hour running backwards, it just stopped dead at one point for no apparent reason, which unfortunately was a sign of potential problems to come. I'm still running in forwards here. Maybe, I don't know, that's a little fast for running in. It's a nice looking engine, and especially the valve gear and the connecting rods run well. Now we're running in backwards. I ran it in on the inner circuit because I didn't particularly want to go through the tunnel with the running in. That does mean it has to go up gradients as it runs in. I could have run it in on the flatter outer circuit, but then it would have gone through the tunnel, and it's inconvenient if it gets stuck in the tunnel. So I had to keep it enough, if I was going to run it at a constant power level, I had to give it enough power to get up the gradients. So there you go, running in backwards, and then I hooked it up to a coal train of 12 wagons, but it's not a super heavy train because there's no weighting in the wagons, and here it is, pulling that coal train up the gradient, coming out of Colville Station there and up the gradient, and in fact it got stuck there. You know, it's not the only loco to get stuck there. You try to go too slowly up the gradient. That one's perhaps a more forgivable getting stuck point, but needed a poke to get it going again. In all fairness, I've had even a Union Mills loco get stuck, like trying to go slowly up the gradient like that. It's something you can stall a loco sometimes, going slowly up the gradient. Unfortunately, this loco stalls somewhat even when it's not going up a gradient, sometimes if you try and run it at all slowly. And normally I edit out most of the problems with that sort of thing when I do running video, but I left some of them in this case because unfortunately they seem to be a bit typical so far of the behaviour of this loco. Yeah, it's pulling the train. I'm trying to go slowly without stalling it, you know. I'm trying to go slowly so you can see it going by, but not stall it. And that's always a little difficult, and it's particularly difficult with this loco. It's got a coreless motor. I haven't taken it apart, to be honest, so I don't know, but I suspect that it doesn't have any kind of flywheel or anything. It certainly doesn't seem to have much ability to sort of maintain even running at a slow speed. Going round by Bilston, still pulling the coal train. Come back up through the back of Colville Station there, and up again up the gradient. As you go out of Colville Station round to the yard, and we got up that time without getting stuck. Round the top there, past the back of the scrap-topped goods yard in towards the main part of the viaduct. these wagons all came from the Kijiji purchase, and there it got stuck again. At least that gives you a chance to see it up close, but I wasn't trying to stop it there. It just stopped there and needed a push to get it going again. But at least that gave you a chance to see it stopped up close, I guess, but you've already seen the other pictures. Yeah, the number of times getting stuck that you see in this running video is fairly typical of the amount of getting stuck that I've had with this engine. Maybe more running will improve it, but it's already had a thorough running in, and there it got stuck again. I was just trying to run it through slowly, but it got stuck. In that case, I think it actually, there's a point just round the corner there. It got stuck on the point, but it hadn't derailed. It hadn't come off the rails. It just stopped on the point. And I don't think it's because the car went backwards there and came down again. I don't think it's because it's not getting contact, because it's got quite a range of contacts. It's got 6 wheels on the loco and 6 wheels on the tender, all with pickups. There's 2 with traction tyres. It's only 2 with traction tyres. And the pickups do seem to work, so I don't think it's failing to pick up electricity. I think I don't know quite what's happening with it. As I say, I think maybe it may be that it's, it's got to drive all that extremely complex valve gear and the coupling rods, and maybe that just creates a bit more resistance to everything running, and when you try and run it very slowly, it sometimes just stalls. But otherwise, I mean, it's a handsome looking engine and it seems to pull pretty well. The traction tyres definitely help with its pulling. And that's, for me at least, a first. I don't think I've, with Graham Farish, I have Daypole locos that have traction tyres. Now here it goes with the test train. This is a different train. This is the 20 wagon test train that I use as my standard decent sized freight train for loco pulling power, and as you can see, it does get it up that gradient. That's the worst gradient on the layout, the curved, fairly steep gradient past the hill there up to the viaduct. And once more, passing up there, and you'll see it gets it up. Now, I don't know how well you can see on this video. There is some wheel spin happening there. It's struggling a little bit, and it's getting some wheel spin, but it does a reasonable job of getting that 20 wagon test train up the gradient. So that's the best pulling potential of any Graham Farish loco that I've had before.